The records of Dr. Henry Jekyll provide a meticulously documented case study of a behavioral experiment gone fatally wrong. While remembered for Gothic trappings, the text functions as a clinical log of a man attempting to solve the burden of social reputation through chemistry. Jekyll was a man of immense wealth and prestige, yet he lived in a state of constant internal conflict. He possessed an impatient gaiety of disposition, impossible to reconcile with the grave, honorable countenance he maintained before the public. Robert Louis Stevenson structured this narrative as a formal investigation, using the legal and medical perspectives of Jekyll's peers to dissect the radical theory that a single consciousness actually houses two distinct warring provinces of good and evil. Jekyll hypothesized that these two natures were merely bound together in the agonized womb of consciousness. He believed the human body was a mere fleshly vestment, a transient shell that could be manipulated by the right chemical agents. His objective was total separation. If the two identities could be housed in different bodies, the upright man could walk his path secure in his virtue, while the evil twin could indulge in darkness without the crushing weight of social disgrace or personal guilt. This was a calculated attempt to preserve a high social standing. Jekyll sought a release valve for his darker urges, a way to participate in the sea of liberty without drowning his professional reputation. The clinical trial began in Jekyll's private laboratory. He combined a pungent red tincture with a specific crystalline white salt, watching the mixture effervesce from purple to a watery green. The resulting transformation was physically wrenching, described as a grinding in the bones and deadly nausea. As the drug dethroned his primary identity, Jekyll felt himself becoming younger and lighter, ultimately losing a significant portion of his physical stature. This new form, Edward Hyde, was smaller and more agile because Jekyll's evil side had been less exercised and less exhausted throughout his life. Hyde was the physical manifestation of the doctor's repressed, underdeveloped instincts. Jekyll built a complex infrastructure to protect his alter ego. He furnished a house in the disreputable district of Soho, hired an unscrupulous housekeeper, and even changed his will to ensure that Hyde would inherit his entire fortune if Jekyll ever disappeared. To manage Hyde's finances independently, Jekyll learned to slope his own handwriting backward. This forged signature allowed Hyde to open his own bank account, further insulating the doctor from any paper trail connecting him to his second life. This initial phase offered Jekyll the perfect immunity. He could shed his respectable body like a thick cloak, commit whatever undignified acts he chose as Hyde, and then return to his study to trim the midnight lamp, safe in the knowledge that Hyde would vanish like breath on a mirror. The experiment soon moved past minor indiscretions. Hyde's violence escalated into a murderous rage, culminating in the public killing of Sir Danvers Carew. Hyde broke a heavy wooden cane over his victim with such force that the bones were audibly shattered. Jekyll's conscience remained dormant through a process of moral outsourcing. He viewed Hyde as a separate being, convincing himself that Hyde alone was guilty, while he returned to his charitable work and religious studies with his reputation intact. Jekyll woke up in his own bed one morning to a horrific discovery. In the yellow light of the room, he saw his own hand. But it was no longer the firm, white hand of the doctor. It was the lean, corded, swarthy hand of Edward Hyde. He had transformed in his sleep without the drug. The balance of his nature had permanently shifted. Hyde had grown in stature and strength through constant exercise, and Jekyll's power to voluntarily change back was failing. The identities were merging. To remain himself, Jekyll had to triple his dosage. He became a slave to the chemistry, facing the constant threat of Hyde breaking through. Jekyll had engineered a biological addiction. His repressed evil was a parasite that had grown strong enough to consume the original identity, turning the doctor's city of refuge into a prison. The experiment reached its terminal stage when Jekyll became unable to maintain his own form for more than a few hours. He was trapped in his laboratory cabinet, a prisoner to the uncontrollable and frequent returns of the murderer Hyde. A fatal flaw in his supply chain ended the trial. Jekyll discovered that his original batch of salt was impure. It was this specific, unknown impurity, rather than the chemicals themselves, that had enabled the transformation. He sent frantic notes to chemists across London, pleading for them to search their old stock and find some of the old salt. When the search failed and the door was finally breached, the only thing left of the experiment was the body of Hyde, dead by his own hand. The chemical infrastructure of Jekyll's dual life collapsed entirely. With the drug no longer working and the police at the door, he resorted to suicide to prevent the monster he unleashed from taking permanent possession of his life. An autopsy of Jekyll's final confession reveals a logical error in his scientific premise. He believed he was performing a clean separation of a dual nature, but the results suggest a far more complex biological reality. Jekyll's hypothesis relied on the idea of symmetry. He expected the potion to isolate two balanced halves, a purely good man and a purely evil one, leaving both free to exist independently. In reality, the drug only isolated the evil. Hyde was pure malice, but the Jekyll that remained was unchanged, the same incongruous compound of virtue and vice. He had not removed his darkness. He had merely given it a separate body and a new set of teeth. The case proves the impossibility of outsourcing our moral failures. Attempting to isolate our shadow into a separate container only provides it with the autonomy and strength required to eventually overwhelm the host.